And that's not the only element of your personal life that's kind of crept into your books. In Beneath the Bleeding, a man sets off a bomb in the football stadium, and you are an avid football fan. Suddenly I'm getting more worried about the topic of this interview.
Well, the football thing was, it was one of those coincidences. I am very involved in Wraith Rovers Football Club, which is the Division 1 Scottish football club that is based in Kirkcaldy, where I grew up. And it's been part of my life since childhood. My father was a talent scout for the club, so I frequently spent Sunday afternoons watching miners and shipyard workers kicking hell out of each other on asphalt pitches all over Fife, generally very badly. But my dad did, in his scouting career, sign a couple of very, very big players. He signed a guy called Jim Baxter, who was the David Beckham of his day. And he also signed a guy called Ian Porterfield. And Ian Porterfield is the reason why I can walk into any pub in Sunderland and get a free drink. Because Ian Porterfield scored the winning goal for Sunderland Football Club in the 1973 FA Cup final, which was the last trophy that Sunderland Football Club won. I'd always been a fan of the club, and I became more actively involved a few years ago when the club was going through some difficulties, mostly because it was being run by a gang of villains. And Gordon Brown, who is also a long-time supporter of the club, decided that he needed to do something about it. So I was in the kitchen one evening, dishing up dinner, and the phone rang. And my lovely wife Kelly, who is American, answered the phone. And I said, whoever it is, tell them I'm just dishing up the dinner, phone back in 20 minutes. So she came back through the kitchen and I said, who was that on the phone? She said, oh, it was Gordon Brown, honey. And I said, what? The Gordon Brown, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown? She said, yeah, I think so. It sounded like him. He's going to call back after dinner. Okay? That's fine. So anyway, Gordon did indeed ring back after dinner and explained to me that the club was in somewhat dire circumstances. And so, like a group of other people, I put my hand in my pocket and gave the club some money. Subsequently went on to sponsor one of the stands, which is now the McDermid stand. It's much in honour of my father as anything else. But it's quite convenient because the ground is right beside the main East Coast Railway line. So if you're going north or south through Fife on the train, you can't miss it. This great big football stand that says, the McDermid stand! I'm told you can see it on Google Earth. But it's all about supporting a club that has its roots in the local community and does a lot of work with the local community. But as it happened, I was writing Beneath the Bleeding, which does have this scene where a football stand gets blown up. So the book had come out over the summer, and then I turned up for the first home game of the new season. And the general manager drew me to one side in the director's room and said, well, thank you very bloody much. I'm sorry, Eric, have I done something to upset you? He said, because Gordon had just become Prime Minister. And he said, all summer, he said, I've had the security services here, checking over the ground, making sure the security's in place for when Gordon comes to the game, so that he can't be attacked on his way in or out of the ground or while he's in the ground. He said, and you go and write a book about blowing up a football stadium. He said, I get the special branch guy coming to me and saying, and this is the woman that sits next to the Prime Minister in the director's box. And I said, well, look at it this way, Eric. Do I look like a suicide bomber? He said, this is fat, it's not a suicide vest.
You've also become a board member.
Yeah, I'm on the board. Yeah. I don't go to board meetings because I don't like meetings. I get bored with board meetings. So I have a proxy who sits on the board for me. It's my cousin's ex-husband. We like to keep things in the family, And he phones me up and tells me the latest tale of woe. But we're doing all right. We've got off to a not bad start this season. It's not bad. I have to tell you that lower division football in Scotland is a complete bloody misery. It's always as one crisis after another. You know, so I do actually, and I don't say this in any sort of like way to sort of big myself up. I do come home to phone messages that say, it's Gordon here. I need to speak to you urgently. Because it's usually, you know, somebody's broke their leg or you know, something needs sorting. People's heads need banging together. And for some reason, I don't understand this. You know, Gordon Brown, a man who's supposedly famous for bullying everybody on his staff, phones me when people's heads need to be banged together. There's something wrong with this picture. Because you see me, I'm just a gentle soul. You know my pussycat. You're making faces behind my back.
One of the glamorous parts of your job.
Yes. Glamorous parts of my job, yes.
Is researching.
Uh-huh.
And you had some incredible topics to research. Blue genes, which involves reproduction without the involvement of men. Ladies.
It's all there, it's theoretically possible. You know there's a clinic in California doing it.
Is your research mostly Google, or do you approach it more hands-on?
I always do it hands-on when I can. The thing about going to the internet or going to a library is you generally get the idea, you get the answers to the questions you're asking. But what you don't get is the answers to the questions you didn't think to ask. And also I think when you talk to somebody who does stuff for real, what you get is what you might broadly call the sociology of the information. You get the little anecdotes, you get the funny little sidelight, you get the, you'll never believe what happened to my colleague when we dug up that mass grave in Kosovo. You know, the funniest thing. So you get the serious stuff, but you also get those little bits that make the information come alive, that make the reader feel that they're being taken inside somebody else's world. And I generally find that, you know, with 3 facts you can blag your way through anything. You know, I think you can give people way too much information. I think what you need to do is to wrap that information into human stuff that makes it come alive, and that's where talking to people who do it for real comes into its own. And you know, people often say to me, but you know, it's amazing that all these people talk to you. It is in a way. But generally, the secret is just to sort of be interested in people, be interested in their lives. Because, you know, most of us, let's face it, you come in from a day's work, and your other half, or the kids, or whatever, they say to you, you know, like, did you have a good day? And what they want you to say is yes, and then shut up. You know? They really don't want you to tell them about your day. So mostly, having somebody sit down across the table from you in a restaurant or whatever and saying, no, I'm really interested in how exactly your work day goes. And you say, isn't that nice? They're interested. And so they tell you, and people are just delighted that you're interested, that you genuinely want to know about it. So generally I find that the experts are fantastically generous with their expertise, but also fantastically generous with the stuff that you need to know to make it come alive. One of the first people I spoke to in research terms was when I was doing, when I was starting to plan The Mermaid Singing, the first Tony Hill novel, and I knew that I needed to find out something about how profilers actually did it for real. Because in the UK we do it a bit differently from America. In America you train up your FBI officers in behavioural sciences, but in the UK we actually use clinical psychologists to work with the police on profiles. And so I needed to find a profiler who would talk to me. And I saw this guy on a local news station talking about his work with the police. And so I rang up the secure mental hospital where he works, and I said, you know, I wanted to find out about profiling because I was writing a novel. And he listened to me and he said, how do I know you're not a nutter? It's a fair question. And so I said, well, I could send you a couple of my books and you could maybe read them and decide for yourself. So I sent him a couple of the Kate Brannigan books, and he rang me up a couple of weeks later and he said, well, he said, I've read your books and my wife's read your books and we think you're not a nutter. We all make mistakes. But he very kindly, he agreed to have lunch with me, and so we had a bit of lunch and we chatted, and he told me quite a lot about what he did. And he suggested that we meet again, but this time that we meet again at his place of work, which, as I said, is a secure mental hospital, which I was slightly worried about. On the general principle of, I knew I could get in, but I was not quite sure about the other end of the equation. However, he did let me out again. But what he did was he actually took me through a couple of live profiles of real cases that he was working on for the police, and showed me the crime scene photos and the reports that he had in front of him, and took me through what he would actually do to construct a profile. And that essentially is Tony Hill's method, which I'm still using 7 books later, as it's what I first learned from him right at the very beginning. And I still call him up and I talk to him about what I'm working on. But he did ask after the second or third book, I can't remember which, not to be mentioned in the acknowledgements anymore. And I was slightly concerned about this to begin with, because I thought, well, maybe I've got things wrong, and he's embarrassed professionally to be associated with these books, which I felt a little bit uncomfortable with. So I said, well, why? Why do you not want to be acknowledged for the very valuable help you give me? And he said, well, it's Tony Hill, really. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, with him being impotent. He said, I'm really getting fed up with people coming up to me at work and saying, can you not get it up then? So that's unforeseen consequences of helping out an author. So I'd like to make it very, very clear that although Tony Hill's method is based on the method of Dr. Mike Berry, the character of Tony Hill has nothing to do with Mike whatsoever.